Today, we take a look at a mysterious case that took place in the quiet municipality of Cravinhos in the Brazilian state of São Paulo. Itaberli, the son of Tatiana Lozano Pereira, found himself at the center of an intrigue. His mother, Tatiana, had separated from the boy's father and married tractor driver Alex Pereira, becoming a mom again. By all accounts, they seemed a peaceful family. Tatiana ran the local supermarket, and Itaberli, the eldest son, lived with her as a dependent. The young man was admired for being educated and unproblematic, dabbling in music with friends in his spare time. None of the neighbors did not assume about the secret conflicts within the family. However, everything changed dramatically when 14-year-old Itaberli decided to share his secret with his mother. He is different from ordinary guys and has no interest in girls. This revelation was the beginning of a nightmare for the young man. Tatiana, instead of support, turned his life into a real hell. By the end of 2016, the relationship between mother and son turned into physical clashes. The day after Christmas, the guy revealed the dark side of his family life on Facebook. He posted a photo with his festive family dressed up in Santa Claus costumes. However, apart from the fun, he shared other photos where his body is covered with abrasions and cuts. In the comments, he said that he was driven out of the house by his mother, who could not accept his personality. Returning to the family a few days later, the conflicts continued, and one day the punishment turned physical. Itaberli decided to leave again, this time finding refuge with his paternal grandmother. Here he found safety, but did not escape his mother's persistent calls begging him to return. Apparently, the hope of a peaceful agreement on New Year's Eve was the mother's last attempt at reconciliation. His grandmother and uncle protested Itaberli's decision to return home, suspecting that there was something dark about the decision. Nevertheless, the young man himself hoped for the best and sought to mend his relationship with his mother, Tatiana. His joy at his return was brief, as an ambush awaited him. Tatiana decided to teach her son a lesson and hired two young men, Miller da Silva and Victor Roberto da Silva, to beat him up upon his arrival. They obeyed Tatiana's instructions and attacked Itaberli, ignoring his cries for help. After he lost consciousness, the woman ordered them to kill him, but the young men refused. Tatiana, persistent in her desire to solve her son's problem, decided to take charge of the situation herself. Taking a knife, she delivered 3 fatal blows to her son's neck. The boys hired for the beating were stunned by what was happening and instantly fled the house. At that time, Tatiana entered the bedroom, where her husband was resting. Waking him, she asked for help in disposing of the body. Together they wrapped Itaberli in a blanket, put him in their car, and drove to a sparsely populated area with dense reeds along the road. There they left the body and returned home, carefully removing the traces of the mess. The next day, the parents returned to the place where they had left the body, doused it with fuel, and set it on fire in an effort to destroy identifying features. From that day on, Itaberli's relatives on his father's side began to worry about him. As time went on, the boy's grandmother became increasingly anxious. He did not contact her to tell her about the supposed reconciliation. Expecting him for New Year's Eve, the grandmother was very concerned about the lack of news. She asked her son, Uncle Itaberli, to take her to Tatiana to ask about her grandson. Confused by conflicting stories, Tatiana stated that her son had gone to a friend's house and she knew nothing. The grandmother, feeling confused, was faced with a dilemma: trust Tatiana or go to the police. Still unable to get in touch with her grandson, she finally decided to go to the authorities, convinced that Itaberli's disappearance was no accident and that the authorities should intervene. She relayed all her suspicions to law enforcement officials. In addition, Itaberli's uncle described the strained relationship between Tatiana and her son. They reported that Tatiana seemed completely calm when they visited. The police began to doubt her as the mother had not reported her son missing, remaining unusually cold-blooded. An investigation into what may have happened began. All suspicions centered on Tatiana. A few days later, On January 7, 2017, a patrol found the body of a young man, almost completely charred, wrapped in a blanket and abandoned in the São Paulo countryside. Deep puncture wounds were visible on the body. An entire bracelet was also found, undamaged by the fire. Police assumed it was the body of a missing young man. Commissioner Elton, who is leading the investigation, notified the boy's grandmother, and she confirmed that the bracelet belonged to her grandson. However, this information was not enough to identify the body. Authorities requested a DNA examination from the Institute of Forensic Medicine using genetic material from the mother. According to the expertise, the death occurred 10 days ago. Investigators determined that the place where the body was found was not a crime scene, as no evidence was found. On January 11, civil police officers searched Tatiana's house and found bloodstains on the upholstery of the sofa, on the bed, and on the walls. They also found 2 kitchen knives with traces of blood, which could have been used as a crime weapon. In dark history, Tatiana Pereira and her husband were caught in the net of justice. All the evidence was clear, and Tatiana didn't argue, admitting that she had committed the tragic murder of her eldest son. However, she offered an intriguing version of events. The woman said that on that fatal day, when she was going to meet Itaberli for the proceedings, he showed up home in a state of alcoholic intoxication, showing aggression towards her, her stepfather, and their 4-year-old young son. Stating firmly that she acted in self-defense, she and her husband claimed to have killed Itaberli, believing his behavior to be a threat to the family. Later, in a panic, they disposed of the body, unsure of how to proceed and fearful of the police. However, the authorities were not inclined to believe this version. The testimony of Tatiana and her husband shook with contradictions, and the police began to realize that before them were 2 liars. To confuse the case even more, Itaberli's relatives told about it in a completely different way, different from Tatiana's version. According to his mother, her son was a troubled guy, prone to drugs and alcohol, who gathered people like him around him. However, neighbors and friends of the Itaberli family told a different story. The boy was responsible, kind, charming, and did not have the habits that Tatiana attributed to him. The only question that worried his mother was about her son's orientation. Police were looking into versions of the motive for the crime, but it became clear that Tatiana and her husband were involved in Itaberli's death. Tatiana tried to delete her son's Facebook post in which he talked about the blows he received. Some of her son's friends forwarded the posts to authorities. The murder was solved. The suspect, the motive, conflicted relationship, the murder weapon, and the victim's body. But then Tatiana changed her position and accused Victor, Miller, and the mediator in the murder. According to the new version, she asked them to teach her son a lesson, claiming that he had threatened and attacked her. According to her, the boys killed her son without her consent while she was out of the house. Tatiana heard her son's cries for help, and after the killers fled, she woke up her husband to dispose of the body. The defendant's lawyer argued that Tatiana acted in a state of passion and in self-defense, citing her son's alleged aggression and violence toward her, as well as his attempt to strangle his younger brother a year earlier. On January 13, the police detained 2 young men and a girl, a possible intermediary between them and Tatiana, a witness to the crime. The young men gave testimony that diverged from Tatiana's version. The girl said that Tatiana had complained to her about her son because of his religiosity and wanted him to be corrected for his own happiness. Tatiana asked the girl to find someone who could set her son straight. The girl recommended her boyfriend and his friend for a fee. Tatiana had hired them, and as a result, a crime had occurred that was already known. The girl stated that the guys left the house before Tatiana attacked Itaberli. She witnessed Itaberli being stabbed after he had already been beaten. The testimony of the boys who beat Itaberli matched, and the police accepted their version of events. The young men claimed that they did not receive any money from Tatiana, but were going to do everything for free. They couldn't stand Itaberli, but never even imagined that the woman would request them to kill her son. They also confirmed that they had not witnessed the crime and had left earlier. This new testimony solved the puzzle, but police continued to investigate to determine who hit the young man. The prosecutor saw a primary motive in disliking the boy's orientation, and all suspects were at the scene, participating directly or indirectly in the murder. The investigation gathered all the evidence, and on February 9, 2017, the prosecutor's office brought the defendants to trial with a charge of aggravated murder. Tatiana and her husband were also charged with concealing a corpse. The couple's attorney filed an appeal for parole, arguing that Tatiana acted in self-defense and her husband was asleep at the time of the murder. The prosecutor's office insisted that the crime was committed because of Tatiana's rejection of her son's sexual orientation. The court decided to take Tatiana, Alex, Miller, and Victor into custody. The girl was placed in a juvenile correctional institution. If her involvement in the murder is confirmed, she will be charged with qualified murder. She was held in custody until she was 21 years old. During the criminal trial, Tatiana remained in jail while her husband and the two young men were transferred to the St. Rose jail. The boy's attorney argued that there was no evidence they were guilty of murder other than their presence at the scene. But the lawyer did not get that argument recognized. After the remand, including Tatiana's incarceration, her defense attorney resigned. He was replaced by Hamilton lawyer Paulin, who built a defense on Itaberli's complex nature as a child. The lawyer argued that the boy had made death threats to family members and filed complaints, but the district commissioner denied the allegations. The circumstances of the murder circulated by the media shocked the city. Itaberli's Facebook page turned into a memorial with expressions of condolence and calls for justice. A few days later, a reenactment of the crime was held. It was supposed to be attended by all participants, but only Tatiana was allowed to leave the prison due to administrative problems. During the reenactment, Tatiana was brought home where she recounted her actions that day, admitting to killing her son and pointing out the place where she and her husband had left the body and then burned it. People gathered at the scene, shouting rebukes at Tatiana for her motherhood, accusing her of being heartless and cursing her for her alleged actions. But there were also those who voiced their support, describing her as a suffering mother doing her best for her child. In the end, her defenders argued that she was simply defending herself. Among those who supported Tatiana was her mother, Grandma Itaberli. She claimed that she had never felt hostility toward her grandson because of his peculiarity, and that her daughter was merely defending her unheeding and troubled son. But the police apparently did not trust these claims, and the number of her detractors was much higher. Itaberli's paternal family did not even have the opportunity to hold a farewell for their dead grandson and son. It was impossible for them to bury the body. The first DNA examination using Tatiana's material was unsuccessful and was recognized as invalid. Then the guy's relatives decided to conduct another analysis, this time using the genetic material of the paternal grandmother. The father himself had already passed away by that time. This analysis confirmed that the body found was Itaberli's. The body was given to relatives for a Christian burial. In a funeral ceremony that took place 7 months after the murder and lasted 2 hours, Itaberli's friends escorted their comrade to his final resting place in the town cemetery. Shortly after the discovery of the body at Itaberli's home, the uncle and grandmother did not waver in their certainty that it was their grandson. However, they had to endure a harrowing time while waiting for evidence to be gathered to bring the perpetrators to justice. During the preliminary investigation before trial, the police received a series of testimonies from neighbors. Witness stories indicated that problems in Itaberli's family began after he revealed his orientation. Testimony said that Itaberli's home became a place of fights and violence, and that Tatiana constantly bullied her son when he returned beaten up by other boys. In October 2017, prosecutors got Tatiana, the Millers, and Victor convicted in Itaberli's death. The stepfather was acquitted of the charges due to insufficient evidence. The court decided that Alex should be tried only for concealing a dead body, not for murder. The decision to release the stepfather was appealed, and the attorneys for the other defendants appealed, arguing that the evidence against them was flimsy. The case against the mother and the other defendants looked strong, but the police still had doubts about Alex's involvement in the violence other than hiding the corpse. It was hard to believe that he could sleep soundly without hearing the brutal attack on his stepson in such a small house. The trial, which began in November 2019, concluded on Nov. 27. Testimony from the 4 defendants and witnesses, more than 20 people, was considered during the trial. A jury of 4 women and 3 men sentenced Tatiana Lozano Pereira to 25 years and 9 months in prison. Victor and Miller were sentenced to 21 years and 8 months for beating the victim, which the prosecution says contributed to Itaberli's murder. Alex, Tatiana's husband, is awaiting a new trial date because his attorney resigned, citing a conflict of interest. The verdict satisfied state authorities, but defense lawyers are appealing the decision, believing the evidence is insufficient. Itaberli's relatives feel justice, despite the impossibility of regaining their lost lives. Tatiana Lozano Pereira is sent to prison for years for her criminal act. Thank you for your attention. Don't forget to stay tuned for more stories. Click right now and don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date.